It's Tennessee week, and we're asking big questions.
We don't deal in narratives and themes and what people say and social media fodder and what you guys think. We deal in truths.
That's all right. That won't stop us breaking down what's up with the Dogs and how to stay alive in the playoff race. Let's do it.
Giving you the insider takes and the big picture view on the Dogs. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingles with DawgNation insider Mike Griffith and Cody Chaffins.
And welcome into On the Beat, Cody Chaffins and Mike Griffith. And Georgia coming off a loss. After that first loss of the season to Alabama, Kirby Smart shared that Nick Saban sent him a text saying, hey, the sun will come up tomorrow. Well, the 2 days since this Ole Miss loss, Mike, I'll be darned, but it's been cold and gray and rainy, and it's kind of matched the mood of this Georgia fan base right now.
Yeah, but now you got the Big Orange coming to Georgia, and I know that'll brighten things up for Dog fans. They won a lot in a row against Tennessee, and the last time Tennessee came, they were the number one team in the country until they met the Georgia defense. I know Kirby Smart and the Dogs are hoping for a lot more of that this Saturday night.
Yeah, Mike, coming to us from enemy territory up there in Knoxville. We're going to have a lot to talk about for this Georgia-Tennessee game, but before we get to that, I wanted to ask some kind of big picture questions. As I'm driving back from Tupelo, Mississippi on Sunday, I started thinking about these things. And we said all last week, this game, Georgia and Ole Miss, would be a referendum on how to build a team, right? Kirby Smart does the high school recruiting really hard. Nobody does it better in the country. Ole Miss, it goes by the way what Lane Kiffin called free agency at SEC Media Days, bringing in all these transfers. So if we were going to say that last week, then the question this week is Georgia doing it wrong? The Dogs bring in all these 5 stars, but we've got 5 stars sitting on the bench. We got 5 stars playing who don't look like 5 stars. Meanwhile, Ole Miss only has 3 5 stars on their whole roster, and Kirby Smart called them the best team he's played all year.
Well, I think Georgia's doing it right, but things have gone wrong. I mean, you've got, 2 of your frontline transfers and Ra Thomas and Cole Young that aren't on the field. I mean, if you take any team's top 2 most talented receivers away, I think they're going to have problems. And, Branson Robinson and Rod Robinson, 2 tailbacks recruited and developed with injuries. So I'd suggest that if you were to take those sort of players away from Ole Miss and grant them to Georgia, things would probably look different. Let's be honest, the defensive line has been banged up. Jordan Hall hasn't been out there. Attrition is a part of the game, Cody. There's no doubt about it. But I look at Georgia's schedule, and it's the number 1 schedule in the nation going into the Ole Miss game, right? And so now that's bolstered even more. So I feel like there's been a lot of attrition. I know Kirby's talked about the schedule and the elasticity when you have to get up for game after game after game. And it's not just cliche. I mean, Lane Kiffin told us after the game Saturday night, there's guys that transferred in his program and said, hey, we're here to beat Georgia. There's guys that stayed another year at Ole Miss because they wanted to come back and beat Georgia. And every team Georgia plays has Georgia circled on the calendar, on the schedule. So when you're getting everybody's best shot, when you've got a bunch of injuries at certain positions like wide receiver, like tailback, and you're getting down into that true freshman running back that has that fumble on key drive, when you get into that true freshman on defense that maybe hasn't seen all, that a more veteran second stringer would see, those things add up. And, I'm sitting there watching the Ole Miss game Saturday, and, it's halfway through the 4th quarter and really until Carson's pick when I say, okay, they're not going to win. I mean, we've seen Georgia come from behind so many times. And, think about this. Georgia has trailed in 13 out of their last 16 SEC games and won 13 of those games. So it's not like Georgia's just been blowing everybody out of the water. I mean, 2021 and 22, long time ago. Last year's team, what was it, Cody? 6 teams in a row that scored on their opening drive touchdowns. So Georgia's been getting by with really good coaching, really good execution, and some guys that have been around the program. And now you've got some more inexperienced guys getting pressed into action against the number 1 team, a number 1 schedule in the nation.
All right, so for a couple things. First off, we will acknowledge Ole Miss. Hey, they were missing Trey Harris, their stud wide receiver. They were missing Henry Parrish, their leading rusher as well. Would you talk about some of those young guys getting thrown into the fire? So my thought is, you don't want Georgia becoming the dinosaur. They're doing it the old way. So is the new way, instead of having to develop your 5 stars, let somebody else go develop your players. And then when they're really good, you pick them off and then they play for you. I think of Walter Nolan, who spent his first 2 years at Texas A&M. He proves himself. Once they've proven themselves, then you throw the money. Then you bring them into your program and let him go be a 5-star for your team.
Well, it's a slippery slope. I mean, you might want to ask Florida State about that, Cody. They brought in a lot of transfers too, and you saw what happened to their program culture. So I think there's, kind of a happy medium in there somewhere. Again, I would stress that the players Georgia gets out of the portal have to be more productive. I would suggest to you that Ben Urisic, the Stanford tight end transfer, has performed well below expectations, missed blocks, a very key drop pass on what could have easily been a scoring drive. Next play, Carson gets sacked instead of first down deep and all. So it's a matter of doing a better job in the portal, getting kids that are going to be able to stay in the program. We've seen Ra Thomas and Colby Young with some off the field issues. I don't know if those could have been projected or predicted, but something that I wrote today on DawgNation.com was, wouldn't it be nice to have Kendall Milton right about now, or Marcus Rosemy-Jack-Saint, or Dejon Edwards? These are guys that didn't get drafted. Now, I don't know if or when Georgia did approach them about another year, but if a kid's not going to get drafted in the first couple of rounds at Georgia, why not take some NIL money? I mean, somebody told me, if Georgia would have offered Ladd McConkey $1 million, sounds like a lot. Sounds good now, though, doesn't it? If you had Ladd McConkey right now, you might have a Heisman Trophy top 5 guy for $1 million. He said, well, that's a lot of money. And I'd say, yeah, well, what are you going to lose if you don't make the playoffs? So I think the model has got to be massaged every year. And another point about the Ole Miss roster, to your point, I think all but 4 or 5 of their guys have transferred in from somewhere else. But it's not like they just transferred last year. Some of these guys are in their 2nd or 3rd year in the program after transferring. I think you and I would agree Dom Lovett, the wide receiver, looks better and more comfortable in year 2. Really hard to get elite guys to transfer right before that bonus year. And Ole Miss, like you said, they threw the bank at it, and it does appear to be working right now. But again, slippery slope. When things go wrong, that program culture kicks in. And I think for the most part, I would suggest that kids that were recruited and developed in the program are probably going to be better program guys and be built better to handle that adversity, having invested more in the school that they're at.
That's why I need you on this program, because you start driving, you start going, are we totally out of our minds? Now, one of the other things people are thinking about, is Georgia doing it wrong? I think that a lot of folks online complaining, hey, we just got all these retreads as coaches. You bring back Mike Bobo, who under Mark Richt, and a lot of us could defend Bobo for most of the season. The last couple of weeks, it's been hard to defend. You got a guy like James Coley, who was fired from Georgia, is back coaching a wide receiver group that has underperformed. You got Stacy Searles, who was an old retread of a coach who's back here. His group didn't play very well this week. What are your thoughts on some of these coaching, and will we see coaching changes?
Well, you just got beat by one of the biggest retreads in the coaching industry. Lane Kiffin's been fired darn near everywhere. He about destroyed a program at Tennessee. The Raiders ran him out of the NFL. Pete Golding, the defensive coordinator at Ole Miss, was essentially on the brink of being fired from Alabama. So, when I hear coaching retread, that doesn't hold water. I mean, coaches move around all the time. Look, I get it. Georgia lost a football game convincingly for the first time in a long, long time. And everybody wants to question the model. And I would suggest to you that Kirby Smart has one of the best models in college football. In fact, just look at the number of players going to the NFL. Look at the amount of consistency. I mean, Cody, this is the first time in 4 years that Georgia's lost 2 games in a season. And even back in 2020, which was the last time they lost to a team not named Alabama, right? It took Jordan Davis and Richard LeCount being out with an injury the previous game for them to have a bad quarter against Florida and Jacksonville. So I think people might be pushing the panic button a little bit too soon here. I think right now I look at it as, gosh, one of those years you get dealt this hellacious schedule from the SEC office. And I know these games are very attractive for the TVs. They want to put Georgia on there. It's high ratings, but is it really fair when we look at Texas's schedule and we see they haven't beaten any ranked teams yet? I mean, it's so Penn State, a team that's ranked. Do we really think James Franklin runs a better program than Kirby Smart? Or is it just that Penn State hasn't played anybody? I mean, what's Texas's most impressive win? Vanderbilt by a field goal? I mean, seriously. So I think you have to take the schedule into consideration. And then sometimes you just got to get lucky and keep guys healthy. And Georgia has not had luck. I mean, your best offensive lineman, Tate Ratledge, preseason All-American, goes out with an injury, comes back after what, 4 games off tightrope, and now he's got a foot and was only able to play, I think, 16 or 17 snaps. ETN, an outstanding transfer in, but he bangs up his shoulder against Kentucky. Then he gets a rib against Florida. I mean, these are some tough breaks. You have your top 2 receivers, your ex-guys, Colby Young, Thomas, with some off-field incidents that hard to predict, domestic issues like that, I would say. And then your tight ends room. I mean, everybody was ready to crown Todd Hartley the best tight end coach in history. Can I coach Brock Bowers so I can get that title? As it turns out, maybe not, because the tight end development has been lackluster this year. When I look at the PFF rankings, and again, it's an independent service, it's not the Georgia coaching staff, but it seems week after week, I'm seeing Oscar Delp near the bottom of that chart, and that's a guy we expected to be an all-SEC type. And then the Stanford tight end, who apparently has the acumen to achieve at a high-ranking school like Stanford, is having trouble wrapping his brain around what it takes to compete in the SEC and catch a ball thrown into his hands. So sometimes kids have to perform, and sometimes they have to stay healthy, and it's harder to do that, again, when you're playing the number 1 ranked team in the schedule and with all the road games. I mean, there's been a lot of adversity on the road, and Georgia has proven they can handle that in the past. But this year they ran into a really good Ole Miss team playing their best football, and things didn't go their way. And yet still, I'm telling you, midway through the 4th quarter, I'm thinking to myself, Georgia's going to find a way, because they always do. So I think it's a little too soon to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's see what happens Saturday night against Tennessee before we start questioning Kirby Smart's program.
Okay, you talked about the tight ends. First off, I think Lawson Lucky is by far your best tight end. Only had 2 targets on Saturday, so hate to see that. And then you talk about the coaching. There's so many players that just don't seem like they've taken that next step. You mentioned Oscar Delp. I feel like, some other guys have. Carson Beck, of course, has gone backwards this year. Is that something that Georgia got wrong in the offseason? Is it development of these players? Did that miss somewhere? Or is it just guys not performing? What's your take?
Well, I'll say this for Carson. I don't put the Ole Miss game on him. I thought he played decent. He didn't have very good pass protection. Again, Dylan Bell, a guy that just keeps dropping passes amazingly. We mentioned Jurasic's big drop. We saw Nate Frazier fumble. Carson's fumble was a blindside hit. Ernest Green wasn't able to catch up with that elite pass rush prospect that transferred in from Florida. Didn't play against LSU, by the way. So I don't put that on Carson. But where Carson has faltered, to me, in my opinion, has been in the leadership department. I know during the offseason, Kirby talked about wanting Carson to be more vocal and work with some of these targets that weren't frontline guys. And I don't really know, in complete transparency, how many hours Carson put in the offseason. I don't really know what Carson says in the huddle. I'm like everyone else. All I see is what's on Instagram. And some of the messaging probably hasn't been the best concerning some of his NFL riches that he's chosen to advertise. I think that gives off a bad look. Certainly on the sideline, those cameras are waiting for him, whether he's dropping his head or looking up at the sky or laughing at a Jaden Rashada joke as the scoreboard clicks down on a loss at Ole Miss. It doesn't look good. I don't think Carson is a bad leader, but I don't think he is a good leader. I think he's just a guy. And I think at the quarterback position, you need someone who brings charisma and confidence. Say this for Stetson Bennett. He wasn't the most consistent guy, but in the 4th quarter, he performed well. And Stetson had a way of playing with some grit that seemed to rally the guys around him. I'd say the same thing for JT Daniels, and I would certainly say the same thing for Jake Fromm, who I thought was a model of how a quarterback should act on the sidelines and in the huddle and with his teammates. But it's not a given. It's something that has to be developed. And Carson sat for a long time before he was given the keys to this offense, and not being a very vocal guy, I think, kind of caught up with him. I've heard Kirby say many times what he wanted Carson to do. You can lead the horse to the water. So I think this is going to be one of these cautionary tales in the future where people say, hey, when you get the NIL money, if you want to buy a Lamborghini or a Ferrari or whatever, that's cool, but don't post those pictures. If you want to go on a golf trip or ride in a private jet, probably not a good idea to advertise that on social media in the offseason. May want to bring your camera to the offseason workout and show everyone how hard you're working, because believe me, Carson Beck and this Georgia team put in a lot of work. And these guys have responded to adversity. Let's not just forget the first 8 games of the season. I mean, I said last week, the fact that Georgia was sitting here 7-1 and ranked number 3 in the nation with the schedule that they'd played and the attrition that they'd suffer was an amazing coaching job. But I think that attrition caught up with them. And certainly an Ole Miss team, they beat 52-17 that went out and signed 2 of the most elite front 7 guys in the country, were laying in wait at Ole Miss in adverse conditions with that slippery turf, making it hard for those big offensive linemen to set their feet and block them.
The last time I can remember Georgia just getting whipped on the line of scrimmage the way they did on both sides of the ball in the regular season, at least, had to go back 2017 at Auburn. In the regular season, it's a game where Kirby Smart said that after the game, just couldn't get things done. I left that game thinking, oh, this Georgia team's in trouble. But you mentioned Jake Fromm. That team gets it right in the SEC championship, bounces back, beats Auburn, goes to Rose Bowl, beats Oklahoma. So, Georgia now going to having Tennessee come to them this week. You called it a play-in game on DawgNation.com. Kirby Smart said he doesn't totally agree with that thinking, but now you're in Knoxville. Give me an update. What are we expecting from Tennessee? Is it a playoff game for the Dogs?
I think it is. I don't think a 3-loss Georgia gets into the college football playoff because of the parity. I mean, you've got 8 teams in the SEC that have 2 losses or less, and now Alabama and Ole Miss have the tiebreaker. I'm thinking that there'll be a 1-loss team, Texas A&M or Texas will be waiting for a 2-loss team, and again, Georgia not having the tiebreak against Alabama or Ole Miss does not bode well for them playing in the SEC title game. That said, if Georgia makes the playoff without playing in the SEC championship game, could be a blessing in disguise. Now, you don't get a bye, but you also don't risk losing in the SEC championship game, playing that extra game, which could knock you out if it's your 3rd loss and you don't look good, or could make you turn around and play 2 weeks later instead of 3 weeks later. And that extra time is really important. When I look at the teams that are going to be seeded 5 through 12, unless it's Alabama or Ole Miss that Georgia gets matched up with, I don't think there's anybody else out there that can beat them. Whether they travel to Indiana or travel to Penn State or travel to, BYU. I guess BYU would probably be the Big 12's top team. At least that's what the Big 12 officials seem to want to do if you listen to Utah athletic director. If they travel, yeah, we better be careful here. Or if they travel to play, I don't know, is Clemson going to be the number 2 team out of it? I don't think that whoever Georgia plays in the 5-12 game is going to beat them. And in fact, depending on who they get matched up with in the semifinal, I think that's very winnable too. It takes a very elite team with talent and matchups to beat Georgia. And when you get to the semifinals or the quarterfinals or the national championship, you're going to be on a neutral site. So you can take the home field that Ole Miss enjoyed out of the equation, that Alabama enjoyed out of the equation. Cody, those are Georgia's only 2 losses were on the road in the SEC against teams that were playing exceptionally well. So again, if Georgia wins the game Saturday night, which the odds makers say they're a favorite to do, I haven't seen the direction of the line and the way it's moved. I know there's a lot of confidence up here in Tennessee. I know they're very excited that Josh Heupel said the quarterback was looking good and he expects him to be able to play. They took Nico out at halftime after an undisclosed upper body injury of some sort. They say he looks good. They've got a running back who's on pace to break Derrick Henry's touchdown record, a rushing touchdown record. They've got the best defense that they've had under Josh Heupel, and they've been winning in different ways. I don't think Tennessee is quite as explosive on the perimeter, and I don't think that Nico has the decision-making that Jackson Dart did, but I do think that the Tennessee defense is going to be tough and hard to run against. I think a lot of this comes down to Georgia's ability to run the ball and give Carson some balance so he's not playing behind the chains. And then conversely, Tennessee needs to be able to run the ball to help Nico out. Now, he is mobile, but he's also young, only a redshirt freshman, and we've seen him make bad decisions in the past. One of the things that Georgia does exceptionally well is disguise their coverage in the back 7. This can confuse him. Now, Heupel's come in to Sanford Stadium before, but he said today that Tennessee was better prepared to play this Georgia team than they were 2 years ago. This is his 4th year as a head coach. He believes the culture's there. He likes his defensive front. and he loves his star quarterback.
Yeah, it's going to be a night game. Georgia, like you've said, has had to go to all these places and let them have the night game and the advantage. Dogs hoping that can make a difference this week. And you talked about the defense. Defense travels. That's the old line, right? It's a Tennessee defense, 18 sacks in SEC play, fourth most in the league in conference play, third most interceptions in SEC play. So, yeah, the defense is what sticks out to me. Which sounds strange to say about a Tennessee team, but you're actually more worried about the defense this time.
Yeah, but listen, I don't think we've talked enough about Sanford Stadium. When I think about big games that Georgia's won at home, 2019 Notre Dame, the game against Tennessee just a couple of years ago, earlier this season, the crowd has been loud at times. I really expect Sanford Stadium to make a difference and impact this game. These Georgia fans, whenever they've needed to step up, they have done so. And the fact that this game is under the lights, ESPN game day, SEC Nation, the country looking on to a de facto playoff game, this is when Georgia is typically at their best. Remember the game at Texas? Nobody thought Georgia was going to win. Like Kirby told those announcers, your network didn't believe in us, he said. And then he said those officials tried to steal it rob us. I think he said rob us, right? When Georgia has been pressed, we have seen the best that the Dogs have. Now, it's just a simple question. Are they good enough? Not are they going to be ready? Not is the crowd going to respond? But does Georgia have enough healthy talent to win a game like this? I think the answer is yes.
All right, we're going to talk about that healthy talent. We'll have some video of that as well. When we come back, we'll do Boots on the Ground and Mike's 30,000-foot view. But you are watching On the Beat, presented by Ingles.
So, you going to play this week?
You gonna play this week?
You going to play this week?
You gonna play this week?
You going to play this
You
week?
gonna play this week? You gonna play this week?
You going to play this week?
You gonna play this week? This week?
And welcome to the Ingles Game of the Week as the War Horses square off against the rival.
He's going in.
He's going in. Go, baby!
Ingles, we're with you every step of the way.
Love having Ingles a part of the program. All right, it is time for Boots on the Ground. All right, got a few things I want to share from the video I was able to shoot in the rain at Ole Miss on Saturday night. First thing I want to show, it's actually something we've shown quite a bit throughout the weeks here on Boots on the Ground. It's the injury update, right? And we saw Tate Ratledge start this game. He was out there, but by the end, you could see how frustrated he was. Didn't even have his helmet with him. This is late in the fourth quarter as they're trying to rally the team. He's so mad, and I hate it for him. He couldn't get out there and just physically could not perform for the Dogs. It's an offensive line, as you said, is so banged up.
Well, it really is, and they've had to do a lot of shuffling. I think they've had 4 or 5 different starting lineups, and, Tate brings more than just the right guard position. He's such a leader. He's such a presence. Michael Morris has done a really nice job, but you had to see him move around. We saw Xavier Truss move inside to right guard, saw Freeling at right tackle. I know Freeling had a pretty costly penalty that put it behind the chain. When you start moving guys around, the chemistry changes, the ability to communicate changes. And we talked about Pete Golding and that Ole Miss defense and all the movement and stunning and twist that they do. And now a guy goes from right tackle to right guard and, he's got to make that snap adjustment. How quickly can he adjust mentally to what's happening out there with those with that defensive movement? And so I think a more stable Tate Ratledge is really going to solidify this offensive line. I don't think it's a matter of Stacy Searles coaching and, Kirby Smart disclosing today that Ernest Green's been dealing with a shoulder, kind of stingers and burners off and on there at left tackle. But I think Ernest probably went up against the most elite edge rusher in the league. I'm not going to say things are going to be easy against Tennessee, but I don't think they'll be quite that hard.
Yeah, and we saw Drew Bobo even get some time in there at guard last week because Georgia was just trying to find answers. A tightrope surgery, we saw Tate come back from it, but like we saw with Amari Smith, for the big guys, it's not like Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers set this weird expectation that can never be matched. It's really tough to come back, and you have a week where you feel good, and then you have a week where it's going to be sore, and that's just part of it.
Yeah, I think it took Amaris Mims more than 4 weeks. So the Tate came back in lightning fashion. May have gone a little too hard, too long against Florida, but 17 snaps. They're going to need more snaps than that from him against Tennessee. I know that if he can be out there, he will. But again, you want to have that level of cohesiveness on the offensive line. When you play good defensive front like Tennessee, you also don't want to dig yourself in a bit of a hole. And, Georgia needs to get off to better starts. I know they had a 7-0 lead on Ole Miss, but by halftime, they were already down. And this is a game I think Georgia needs to grab the momentum early. Again, give Carson Beck some balance between the run and the pass. I think Frazier, the learning curve is going to be sharp. He's going to be that much better, after a performance where he ran the ball well, but, ball got torn free a couple times. They lost one of those fumbles. Cash Jones, a guy that's done a lot more. You wonder a little bit about the receiver position, and if these guys are going to be spending a little bit of extra time on the jugs machine catching balls, because Cody, there's been so many catchable balls that have been dropped this season. I can understand why Carson would be frustrated.
Yeah, and I think Carson, nobody's helping him out if he's getting sacked and they're dropping balls. A lot comes off of him there. All right, this is the first time I was on the field for a field storming, right? I've been in the stands. I was at Kentucky back in 2006. I think they stormed the field after they beat Georgia in that game. But I was on the field, and there's a lot that goes into it, which was interesting to me. So a few minutes left on the clock. It's pretty clear there's going to be an Ole Miss win. You had them packing up the equipment early. There's AD Josh Brooks talking to security. How you going to get my guys out of here, right? He says, all right, I'm okay with that plan. One of the other things you don't realize till you're down there, look how big this drop is. And you had you had people in their 60s jumping down here. I'm surprised we don't hear more broken ankles at the urgent care in Oxford, Mississippi. But this was a big jump down that all these fans had to do. And, folks getting helped out once they get down there. So that was another thing that stuck out to me. And then just the matter of fact of just getting Georgia's players off. So we saw kind of the false start from the fans. During that false start, as soon as Georgia's offense was done, you can see the Jonas Jennings getting Carson Beck out of there. He was out of there before that final kneel down by Ole Miss. They got him off the field because you can see the fans in the background. They're kind of realizing they needed to get back off the field. So Carson Beck gets off. And then, I was kind of filming all this because you're interested to see what kind of interactions there are between fans and players. At the Miami field storming, for instance, there's video of one of the Miami players throwing a phone, and you sometimes see interactions. How about Chaz Chambliss and the strength he had to not do anything here? Guy gets right in his face. This is a guy, Chaz Chambliss, an MMA-trained guy who could have dropped that fella in 2 seconds, and credit to the Ole Miss security there for getting in there and getting his face, but credit to Georgia's players for not making any bad moves right there. Kirby Smart checking to make sure he got all his players off. He grabs Dalen Everett here at the end. So a lot going into the field storming from the Georgia just logistics side of it, and everything seemed to come off without incident, at least for the most part. We'll talk about the other part in just a minute. But your thoughts on a field storming there, Mike?
Well, Georgia doesn't lose many games, so they're not used to it. We just talked about the last non-Alabama game they lost. That was to Florida at a neutral site where, it's just not quite the same as losing in an opponent's stadium. So it's been a minute since they've lost in an opponent's stadium. We talked about the Florida game being away from home. I guess Alabama 2020. I don't think the Crimson Tide is going to be storming the field after any wins anytime soon. They look like they're going to be a playoff team right now. I'm trying to think of the last potential team that would have stormed the field against Georgia. You think about it, Cody, and
I was thinking maybe the prayer Jordan Hare. Did they storm the field after that Auburn when they scored that late touchdown?
Yeah, I mean, this not in the Kirby, 2016. The expectation high. I mean, you got to go back 10 years now. I was actually covering the Tennessee when Georgia beat Tennessee, and Georgia fans stormed the field. But this is something new to the Dogs, and I think it adds fuel to the fire. You hear the guys saying, "I don't ever want to be a part of that again," and you realize what just happened. You realize that someone took something from you. I mean, Lane Kiffin was being a smart aleck after the game, saying how cool it was that Georgia was throwing screen passes because they were afraid of their pass rush. I mean, probably not the smartest thing for Lane to say if Georgia were to play Ole Miss again on a neutral site. Georgia's going to get some guys back healthy. But this part of the schedule, we knew this would be tough. We knew when we saw the schedule and we saw these road games and we thought, oh my goodness, who did Kirby Smart upset at the SEC office to get a schedule like this where he's got to go on the road against top 10 teams, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Texas. That's ridiculous. And then Georgia, of course, played a pretty decent non-conference opener against Clemson and Kentucky, when Kentucky still had something to play for at the start of the year. So again, I go back to that schedule. As far as what I saw from the Georgia players, I wouldn't expect anything else. I mean, Kirby talks a lot about poise, and he talks about the roller coaster of emotion that so many other teams we've seen them ride, and that's just not how Georgia operates. So I wouldn't expect anything less in terms of how they got off the field. And I guess in some cases, some players might have been even too loose after the game.
Yeah, that's the one thing we can't let this get on without talking about. Jake Pope there is seen in a video kind of jumping around with Ole Miss fans. Kirby Smart said, that was just stupid, was the direct quote from Kirby Smart at his press conference. Jake Pope kind of getting on and talking about it on Twitter, saying he apologizes. He was trying to explain it was a friend from Buford High School that he didn't expect to see and saw and kind of reacted in a bad way. I will say this about Jake Pope. Seems to be a good dude. Like, I watched him sign a lot of autographs at the Florida game when he did not have to. Has not really contributed to the team this year and gotten on the field as a transfer from Alabama. But it wasn't a good look at all. And kind of agree with Kirby, although it was unusual for Kirby to call out one of his players the way he did.
Well, it was an embarrassing moment for Georgia and, for Jake Pope. Unfortunately, that's his Georgia legacy. It's the most significant thing he's done in a Georgia uniform, unfortunately for him. At least publicly. I know behind the scenes he's kind of helped mentor some of these guys and help coach these guys up. But, you've got to have more of an awareness. We talked about Carson Beck needing to have an awareness. I think it's team-wide. And, let's face it, Georgia has had an incredible run of success. And a lot of the players that are here were part of that, but they weren't frontline players. And I don't want to say they've ridden the coattails of others, but they have yet to earn it themselves. Now, I'm not talking about a guy like Chaz Chambliss. He's a great leader, or a Tate Ratledge. That's a guy that's been in the trenches in the wars. I'm talking about some of the younger guys, maybe some of the transfers. We talked earlier about transfers, and I was telling you about program culture. I would say that if Pope had been recruited and developed at Georgia, I think he could have seen his deceased, grandfather and not celebrated after a loss like that. Because when you're a part of the Georgia culture and you wear that G, you have a better idea of what it means than when you transfer in and the nameplate changes in the locker room. So, I say this is a cultural thing. I say this is a teaching point. I'd say that Kirby Smart will probably deliver a very loud and message that would probably need to be censored at some point this week. I think Georgia practices are going to be fire. Kirby never beat Tennessee as a player. And even though he tells you that they're all the same, and even though he tells you that he doesn't take things personal, I have a different read on that. When Kirby Smart's Georgia teams play Tennessee, they seem to play it at another level. And I can't help but think, having talked to some players, that Kirby, if you can imagine this, is going to be even more on edge, more aggressive, more vocal. The wick is going to be turned up on these guys this week, Cody.
Yeah, if we're quiet right now, you can almost hear Kirby on the microphone. It's just shouting at some guys. That'll be echoing around the state of Georgia. All right, I'm not going to let this day get by without showing you the other thing that happened on Saturday at Ole Miss that I just could not get enough of. It is Veterans Day, and we had a veteran homecoming where they come back and surprise the family. It was the coolest thing. I turned around, all the Georgia cheerleaders, they're in tears. I'm getting misty-eyed looking at it. It is Veterans Day. Mike, you are a veteran. Thank you for your service. Thank everyone out there who has served in the armed forces. This was a really cool moment. I can't get enough of these.
Yeah, it's a great highlight to show, Cody. And, I can't speak for others, but I think a lot of veterans feel the way I do. I mean, it's an honor and a privilege to serve your country. You learn so much. You learn to understand the sacrifices that people made in front of you. And just like when you play for a program, you feel like you're part of a team that has a cause. And that cause is to represent the greatest country in the world and the independence and the freedoms that we enjoy. So it's wonderful that we have a day like this to celebrate. And it's nice when folks like you acknowledge that. Yes, there is a sacrifice for sure, but I can tell you that certainly in my case, the return has been incredible. I'm so thankful. I don't think I would have near the success in life that I've enjoyed without those lessons that I learned from folks in the military, from my leadership, from my command, from my airborne brothers. It was a great experience for me, and I feel like it's taken me far in life. And again, I feel like I had an honor to represent what I believe is the greatest country in the world.
Yeah, I think sometimes we see folks in uniform kind of almost the same way we do football players, and you forget that they're people, right? And there are things that they are sacrificing when they put on that uniform, and to see guys with their family. Again, we're gonna watch it one more time as he picks up a little boy right here, because it was just so cool to see them get reunited there on Veterans Day.
It is a great moment. When you serve, you feel like we call the people that are non-military, when you serve, civilians, right? You become government property, and you become part of a much bigger product, that's charged with a very important task. So yes, they are people, but I guarantee you that man in that uniform right there considers himself part of a much bigger machine than just being one individual.
All right, that is boots on the ground. Now it's time for Mike's 30,000-foot view. All right, Mike, SEC looks like log jam city right here, as we still have no idea who's going to play in the SEC championship game.
Well, Cody, can I start with some comic relief? Because some of these questions you've asked me have been pretty dark, quite frankly. I didn't know you had it in you. You're the weatherman over there, and all the skies are cloudy and stormy, according to you. But so let's interject a little comic relief.
Yes, please.
If you think you got problems, how would you like to be Florida right now? You just announced that Billy Napier, you're keeping him from another year. And I'm watching the game, and I think they're behind by 5 touchdowns by halftime at Texas. And if you're a Florida fan, you got to be just pulling your hair out like, wait a minute, we just kept this guy and we can't even compete, but it's kind of a testament, to human nature, right? When there's a sense of urgency and you're hearing, oh my gosh, coach might get fired. I might have to find a new place to play. We better work with it. And then, he's going to be back. Oh, everything's okay. Let's go to Texas. And just, and part of it too, they're playing with a 13 quarterback, but it was a different Gators team than Georgia saw in Jacksonville. It just wasn't the same. Never mind the fact that, the basketball coach has some issues going on. The athletic director right now under big fire. Florida really in a tough situation, and they've got LSU coming to Gainesville on Saturday. So that'll lend us to this. LSU, one of those teams that has 2 losses or less. I suppose they're still in the running. I haven't done the mathematical equations yet for this SEC tiebreaker scenario. Right now, though, I think LSU on the outside looking in. But the teams that are still in it, Texas A&M, certainly Alabama, Ole Miss. I believe Ole Miss has a bye this week. Let's take a look at South Carolina. 3 losses, maybe playing as good as anybody. You think Shane Beamer wants those last couple of minutes back against LSU? I mean, they really put it on Vandy. Talk about the clock strike at midnight on the Vanderbilt Commodores. Tennessee still got to travel there. Keep your guy on that game in the future. Eli Drinkwitz has quite a sense of humor. He mentioned that after beating Oklahoma, they were still in the college football playoff picture. I'd say, somewhere near the bottom of the credentials for the movie. I just can't imagine Missouri being a playoff team. To me, Cody, it's Texas. It's Texas A&M. It's Georgia. It's Alabama. And it's Ole Miss right now for those final 2 spots.
Yeah. First off, the question I posed at the beginning when we said we were getting dark and serious, is Georgia doing it wrong? And it's a question. And Georgia's obviously doing just fine. The answer is Florida is doing it wrong. It seems like on all fronts because, you talked about, the basketball, you got that going on. You got Billy Napier and their firing coordinators. And, there's no question there.
Drives the Bentley SUV. You got to have at least a Lamborghini SUV, right? I'm just kidding. The DJ Lagway. Incredible talent. And that's a big part of the reason why they kept Billy Napier was DJ Lagway. This guy is really special and really good. And so they look at that as, obviously a cornerstone to their future. It just goes to show you the impact that this portal and NIL has had. It's really, it's a new world out there. Like Kirby said, so that's why I always roll my eyes when people say, Kirby just does it a lot like Nick Saban. Hey, that was ancient history. This ain't your uncle's college football, folks. This is a whole new game, and Kirby Smart has been the master of roster management. All you got to do is look on NFL rosters, most number of NFL draft picks over the last 4 years. You look at the consistency of top 7 finishes, since 2017, preseason top 5, top 10. I mean, bowl streak. It's just, you just can't say after a loss to Ole Miss that things are done wrong. I understand why you asked the question, though, because there are some people on social media losing their mind, right? There's some people that are grabbing at the low-hanging fruit. Fire everybody, right? Fire Carson back, fire the offensive coordinator, change things up, go to the portal, go buy everyone. That's just not a formula for continued success. I'll give Ole Miss credit. They're doing a great job. Things appear to be working out. The season's not over yet, but Ole Miss could indeed be a national championship team. That might have been the best team in the country that you played. But then I'd say this, what happens next year? Right. You can't continue to go out and land all these guys year after year after year. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somewhere out there, Eli Manning is burning his millions to fund Ole Miss, or Arch Manning, or whoever. I don't know if you were in Tupelo. I don't know if Elvis had any. So I don't know where this money is coming from at Ole Miss, but it's hard for me to imagine Ole Miss having the kind of money, having more money than Georgia, certainly than Texas or Tennessee. So now Lane's proven, that he can identify talent, bring it in and coach it up, but let's take a look closer at their schedule. With all that talent, they still managed to lose at home to Kentucky. With all that talent, they still managed to blow a game they controlled against LSU. So I'm just saying it's just a little early before we start pressing any buttons or trying to prop up the sky from falling.
That's why we like having somebody who's been around this league for a long time, been around college football for a long time, that can put things in perspective for us. That is the charge of On the Beat. All right, we're going to take another break here on The Beat. When we come back, our Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing Who's Hot and Who's Cold segment.
I'm so glad you're here.
Let's take a look.
Anytime can handle all your HVAC and plumbing needs, providing top quality service for a reasonable price.
All fixed now.
Can we call you again?
Yes, anytime. Any day? Yes, anytime.
But for the heat?
Yes, anytime. For the toilet? Yes, anytime. Anytime you have a problem, just call.
Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing. Large enough to handle your HVAC needs, but small enough to care.
Love seeing those big blue Anytime vans rolling around Atlanta as I do. All right, it's time for our Who's Hot and Who's Cold segment. Who's hot this week, Mike?
Well, you got to say it's Ole Miss. I mean, 22 sacks in the last 3 games, and Jackson Dart and Lane Kiffin, looking pretty good, feeling a lot of momentum going into a bye week. I think they have Mississippi State left on the schedule, and can't remember the other team off the top of my head, but that looks to me like a team that's probably going to win out and make the college football playoff. Not in the projected top 12. We'll find out tomorrow night when the College Football Playoff Committee puts out their second set of rankings. As of now, though, Georgia projected in. But right now, Ole Miss, a hot team. Alabama. Jalen Milrose decided to run the ball again. Boy, don't they look like a different team when he decides he wants to play like that? What an impressive win against LSU. I think the Crimson Tide looks like a team that's going to win out as well. So I start with Alabama and Ole Miss, and Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks. They just keep winning, and they look really good. They look like they're going to hold on to that number 1 seed. Ohio State continues to win, an impressive win for them against a nothingless Purdue. My goodness, if Georgia only had a bottom half of the league like that to play against. So those would be my hot teams, Cody.
All right, yeah, and for Who's Hot, I'll go even player-specific here. I thought the backup quarterback for Austin Simmons, I thought that was a huge moment for Ole Miss in that game. He had to come in the second series, and not only did he come in, they convert a 4th down. They trusted him enough because it wasn't really deep into Georgia territory. It converts a 4th down. He comes in, keeps it on track, and really, for me, after Georgia scored, you could kind of hear the Ole Miss crowd, all right, is this going to be the same? Are we Ole Miss still? Is this going to be the same game? But he came out there and drove them down the field and scored that touchdown. I thought that was a huge moment in the game. And kudos to a guy who didn't know he was going to have to come in right off the bench and keep it on the tracks, and then comes out and Jackson Dart comes back in. But I thought for him, keeping it right there was a huge part of that Georgia loss on Saturday to Ole Miss. All right, who is cold this week, Mike?
Well, Vanderbilt's cooled off a little bit, losing by 3 touchdowns at home to South Carolina. Their quarterback's I guess he's appealing for another year of eligibility. Somewhere Stetson Bennett says, can I get a piece of that? I don't know, Cody. I'm not sure what to think about this as far as whether guys should be playing into their late 20s or not. I know there's extreme circumstances. He was obviously a junior college kid, much like Stetson, for 1 year. I think that's cold, though. I mean, you got the COVID year, you have the redshirt year. To me, I think 6 years is where you want it to stop. I mean, we don't want this, or maybe we do. Maybe I shouldn't speak for everyone. But the game's kind of semi-pro enough, much less if you get too many guys like Chris Winkie. What was he, 28 or 29? Right. Florida State, a guy that played some minor league baseball. I just think there needs to be limitations on that academic eligibility window for players. And to me, I think 6 years is plenty, unless we're talking about an extreme situation of military service, or perhaps maybe a religious mission, or some bizarre freak injury or something like that. But to me, it's cold to ask for another year of eligibility after 6 years. That is a cold thing to me. So that is probably my coldest take of the free. I don't think we can make a Hugh Freeze joke this week. So we get to, Auburn fans get to sit this one out at least for another week. But those would be the two cold things for me: Vanderbilt football and the proposal for yet another year of eligibility in college football.
Yeah, I really feel like that is something that unites college football fans. Is they don't want to see these guys getting so old still. You don't want a journeyman, college football player who's, getting really old right there. The one thing that was cold for me this week, boy, Ole Miss, they did a fireworks show between the third and fourth quarter. The whole first half of the fourth quarter, you couldn't see. Like, it was so rainy, like the smoke never blew off. It was not. I thought for sure Kirby Smart wasn't going to let his team go out there and play in that. It was kind of a.
Cody, I'm getting worried about you. We might need to get you some hazardous duty play with fireworks and smokes and field storming and things getting thrown at you. I mean, it's kind of like, where's Cody this week? I feel like you're in peril every week you're on the field.
I will say I didn't have any red and black on when I was there. I was just kind of in gray. The fans did not bother me at all. And I didn't see, like, you saw the one guy come up to Chaz Chambliss, and there was a lot of yelling and a lot of birds being shot, but there wasn't a lot of physical with the fans. So I didn't see that part of it. I think they were all out there to have a good time. And I thought they did, the security did as best they could to handle that situation.
I've seen that Chambliss footage, and every time I can almost feel Chaz Chambliss's emotions and thinking to myself, this guy has no idea how close he came to serious. I mean, Chaz Chambliss is, between the lines, a very violent person. I still remember back after a college football playoff championship game between Miami and the Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl, and a Miami linebacker just really socking it to a photographer that thought he was going to get a really exclusive picture of this guy crying. That did not work out too well. Between the lines, these guys have a very different temperament. Off the field, very well-mannered, carry themselves, very nice young men and professional. But between the lines in that arena, there's a reason that there's a cooling off period, Cody. I know you've seen that. I know you've felt that. You've done enough of these games. To me, I'll throw another cold take on there. I don't like the field storming, Cody. I think it's got to stop. I think we're in an era right now where something really, really bad can happen. And I'm not just talking about protecting the players from the fans, and I don't think there's metal detectors everywhere, but that's one reason. But on the other half, protect the fans. You get in the face of the wrong player at the wrong time at the wrong moment, and I think you could have a disastrous consequence. I think the field storming has to stop. If they continue to do it, the fines aren't enough. The fans are there to watch the game. The players are there to perform. It's not meant to mix, and this needs to stop before something severe and drastic happens.
I agree, and the one thing that's different now than ever is all these guys are now not only tailgating all day, they've been drinking for 60 minutes watching a football game, 4 hours in some cases watching a football game as well. The thing about Georgia fans is they did it, 2000 against Tennessee? We hadn't done it since, and Georgia fans, you don't expect, if they're doing it again, something's really gone wrong, because you don't want to be in that position like a Georgia Tech, where it happens every year because we don't expect to be beating these kinds of teams. So if Georgia's in that moment, in that spot, you're in a really bad shape as a program, because that's not where you want to be at all.
Yeah, Ole Miss certainly didn't know how to act like they've been there because they haven't been there. They couldn't even time it right. So to your point, I don't think you're going to see any. There's a prediction for you. I don't think you're going to see Georgia fans ever storm the field as long as Kirby Smart's a head coach, because the expectation is to win every game.
All right, so Mike, you're in Knoxville this week. We expect some more coverage of the Vols as we kind of hear from the other side on DawgNation.com.
No doubt I'll have a story from you tomorrow. Josh Heupel had a lot to say about Carson Beck, and he talked about why his team is better prepared to beat Georgia this time than they were 2 years ago.
It'll be really interesting to hear from Heupel, a quarterback who knows quarterbacks, so that'll be really good stuff. Look forward to reading that. Thank you, Mike, for joining us. It's been really fun, and sorry I had to get doom and gloom on you. Hopefully we'll be a lot cheerier, happy sunshine and rainbows next week.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Cody.
All right, we'll see you next Monday night.